The wind rustled through the tall pines, carrying the scent of damp earth and wildflowers. She moved cautiously, each step measured, as though the forest itself could betray her. Life had taught her caution. Trust had become a luxury she could no longer afford. Her eyes, sharp and wary, scanned the shadows. Every sound, every movement was a potential threat. Yet she could not ignore the pull she felt, the silent awareness of someone watching, not with malice, but with intent she could not yet define. He stepped from the shadows with the quiet grace of a predator. Yet there was no threat in his eyes, only an intensity that made her heart clench in a way she had not felt in years. She knew the stories, Apache warriors, fierce and untamed, loyal, to none but their own. And yet, standing before her was a man whose gaze did not demand, who did not press, who simply existed, observing. "You want me for my body," she accused, her voice trembling despite her attempt at firmness. Words, once used lightly, now carried the weight of years of caution and fear. She braced herself for the response she thought inevitable. Denial, excuse, charm. Perhaps even mockery. Instead, he met her accusation with calm, unshaken eyes. "No," he said simply. The single word heavy with sincerity. "I want you because you don't beg." The statement struck her with an unexpected force. For the first time in a long while, she was not being judged for her fears, her boundaries, or her independence. He did not seek to break her, to bend her to desire. He sought her strength, her defiance, the very qualities she had once believed made her unlovable. Confusion tangled with curiosity, and for a fleeting moment, she lowered her guard, not fully, but enough to notice the subtle tension in his posture, the respect in his gaze. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Birds paused mid-flight, and the rustle of leaves softened. She realized almost unwillingly that the man before her was not a predator waiting to claim. He was a force of patience and observation, willing to meet her on her terms. She took a step back, instinct still whispering caution, yet part of her longed to understand him. "Why me?" she asked, her voice softer now, less an accusation, and more a tentative question. He tilted his head, as if measuring the weight of his words. "Because you are not like the others. You do not beg. You do not yield to what is easy. You stand your ground, and that is rare. That is beautiful." The simplicity of his honesty disarmed her. She had been surrounded by men who wanted her submission, her acquiescence, who mistook compliance for desire. This was different. Here, in the quiet of the forest, she felt seen, not as an object, not as a prize, but as a person whose courage and defiance could be recognized and even admired. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself a small, cautious smile. Perhaps he was not here to break her. Perhaps he was here to challenge her in ways she had not imagined. And though fear still lingered at the edges of her mind, curiosity, a long-forgotten companion, stirred. The wind picked up again, whispering through the pines, carrying with it the sense of possibility. She did not know what would come next, or if trust could ever be granted so freely. But she knew one thing with absolute clarity. This encounter, brief and startling as it was, had already begun to change her. The next morning, she woke to the soft glow of sunlight filtering through. The trees, the forest alive with birdsong and rustling leaves. She thought she had imagined him, that his presence had been a fleeting shadow between the pines. But then she saw him, sitting across the clearing, sharpening a blade with precise, deliberate movements. His focus was unwavering, yet he was aware of her gaze. She wanted to retreat, to disappear into the trees, but something held her in place. Curiosity and perhaps the faintest flicker of trust kept her rooted. "You move quietly," she said, her voice still cautious. "Almost like the wind itself." He glanced up, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "I am part of this land," he said. "The trees, the animals, they speak, if you know how to listen." She frowned, uncertain if she should be impressed or skeptical. "And what do they say about me?" For a moment, he said nothing. His eyes seemed to study her, not with desire, but with attention that bordered on reverence. "That you are wary, that you have been hurt before, that you are strong, but that strength has its limits." Her chest tightened. How could he see so much without even knowing her? She wanted to deny it, to dismiss his insight as mere luck, but it was too accurate. Her heart, guarded for so long, began to shift slightly under the weight of his observation. "Don't need anyone," she said sharply, more to herself than to him. "And I don't trust easily." He nodded, as if he expected nothing less. "Nor should you. Trust is earned, not given, and I do not ask for it lightly." The tension in the air shifted, not toward confrontation, but toward an understanding neither had yet named. She noticed small things, the way his hands moved over the blade, careful yet capable, the steadiness of his breathing, the absence of any expectation in his gaze. He was here, fully present, without pressing, without claiming. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the occasional call of a bird or the snap of a branch underfoot. She found herself relaxing in small ways, letting her eyes linger on him, noticing the strength in his posture, the patience in his demeanor. She had always believed that desire was intertwined with pressure, that affection came with strings. But here, he was teaching her another lesson, that attention, respect, and admiration could exist without demand. Eventually he spoke again, his voice low and steady. "You fear being wanted for what can be taken. I want you because of what cannot be taken, your courage, your defiance, your spirit." She searched his face for deceit, for mockery, but found only sincerity. Her defenses, built brick by brick over years of disappointment, felt less like walls now and more like armor that could be laid aside, carefully, cautiously, but still willingly. The forest seemed to breathe with them, the wind carrying a promise she could not yet name. She did not yet know if this connection would survive the outside world, the judgments and dangers that lurked beyond the trees. But she did know that for the first time in years, someone had looked at her and wanted not her submission, not her body alone, but the very essence of who she was. And in that moment, she let herself hope, just a little, that perhaps desire could exist without betrayal, that trust could be approached, one careful step at a time. Days passed, each one drawing her closer to a truth she had long refused to face. She wanted to understand him, even if she would never admit it. The forest, once a place of solitude and safety, now carried the subtle weight of his presence. She could feel him watching, not intrusively, but as if his eyes were a shield as much as a gaze. It was during a midday walk through the dense woods that the first real test came. A rustle in the underbrush, sharp and sudden, made her freeze. A wild animal, perhaps a wolf, emerged, its eyes gleaming with predatory intent. Her heart raced, adrenaline sharp and cold. She reached for a branch to defend herself, but it was useless against the creature's speed. Before fear could take full control, he was there. In a blur of motion, he placed himself between her and the wolf, his stance wide, every muscle coiled with readiness. The creature hesitated, sensing his power, then backed away into the shadows. She could hardly breathe. You didn't have to," he cut her off with a calm, steady voice. "I did not come here to harm you, only to ensure you leave unharmed." Her chest heaved, not just from fear, but from the realization of his intent. No demand, no expectation, only protection. And yet, that protection came not from fear or obligation, but from a quiet respect she could almost feel pressing against her own defenses. As they resumed their walk, silence stretched comfortably between them. She wanted to speak, to ask the questions that had been building in her mind since the first encounter, but words seemed inadequate. She noticed the small details, the way his eyes scanned the forest, attuned to every movement, the rhythm of his breathing, steady and controlled, the subtle way he moved, always anticipating, always prepared, yet never imposing. Finally, she broke the silence. "Why do you stay?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, yet carried the weight of every doubt she had ever had. He looked at her, unflinching. "Because I see you. Not just your strength, but your fears, your boundaries, and the courage it takes to maintain them." "That is worth staying for," she wanted to scoff, to hide behind the shield of skepticism that had protected her for so long. But the truth was undeniable. No one had ever seen her this clearly, had ever recognized her defiance as something admirable, rather than frustrating or inconvenient. A soft wind stirred the leaves around them, carrying with it the scent of pine and the wild freedom of the forest. She felt something shift inside her, a slow thawing of walls she had long thought impenetrable. For the first time, she wondered if perhaps she could allow someone to see her completely and not be used for it. He paused, waiting for her to speak, giving her the space to decide how close she wanted him to come. And in that patience, she found a strange comfort, as if the forest itself had conspired to show her that not all attention demanded submission. She started, then stopped, unsure if she could voice the thought even to herself. "I don't know if I—" He smiled faintly, not pressing, not judging. "You do not have to know now. You only need to live today." And in those words she realized that desire, trust, and admiration could coexist without pressure, without fear of betrayal. He did not want her because she was easy to take, nor because he could claim her body. He wanted her because she stood firm, because she resisted, because she was herself. And that truth, raw and unguarded, was more intoxicating than anything she had ever known. The forest embraced them in silence, each step forward an unspoken promise. And she, cautiously, allowed herself to hope, not for certainty, but for the slow, deliberate possibility of a connection built on respect, strength, and something far deeper than mere desire. The forest had begun to feel like a world apart, a place where rules of the outside no longer applied. Yet even in this sanctuary, the shadows of reality lingered. That afternoon, while she collected herbs near a creek, the distant sound of hoofbeats shattered the quiet. Instinctively she froze, her heart pounding in recognition of a danger she could not yet face alone. He appeared at her side, as silent and swift as always. Without a word, he scanned the horizon, eyes narrowing. "They've come," he said, low and controlled, his voice carrying a weight that made her understand the threat without needing details. "Who?" she whispered, fear sharpening her words. "Those who would take what is not theirs," he replied. There was no hesitation, no unnecessary flourish, only a quiet authority that demanded attention. She realized in that moment that his calm was not born of naivety, but of experience, of knowing how to confront danger without letting it dominate. The riders emerged over a ridge, armed and intent. Her first instinct was to flee, to hide among the trees, but his hand on her arm held her steady. "Stay close," he instructed, and she did, trusting a man she had only recently begun to understand, trusting the strength she could not yet measure. In a blur of movement, he positioned himself between her and the threat. His presence was a shield, his gaze a warning, and in that silent exchange, she felt a deep, inexplicable connection. He did not push her behind him out of possession, but out of protection, his respect for her autonomy evident even in this moment of danger. The riders paused, assessing the unexpected readiness of their target. And then he acted, not recklessly, but with precision. A warning shot, a calculated movement, and they faltered, unsure how to respond to a warrior who seemed both untouchable and utterly grounded. She watched, awe and fear mingling in her chest. He was not simply fighting for survival. He was fighting to ensure her safety, without asking for anything in return. And in that realization, a new layer of understanding settled over her. The accusation she had thrown at him days before, the accusation of desire without depth, felt foolish now. He did not want her body, or her obedience, or her compliance. He wanted her life, her safety, and perhaps even her heart, on terms she could control. After the riders finally retreated, leaving only the whisper of their hooves fading into the distance, she exhaled, trembling. You risked yourself. For me, she said, voice barely audible. He turned to her, eyes softening, though still alert. I would do it again, he said. Not because I expect anything, but because your life is yours to protect, and I will help you guard it. A strange warmth filled her chest, something between gratitude and the stirrings of trust. She realized she was beginning to see him as more than a protector or a mysterious warrior. She saw him as a man whose strength was matched by his restraint, whose desire was guided by respect rather than possession. The forest returned to its quiet rhythm, the creek burbling softly, the sunlight dancing through the canopy. And in that fragile calm, she felt the first real trace of peace she had known in years. Not safety in the absence of danger, but safety in the presence of someone who understood and honored her boundaries. Her walls, though far from gone, had begun to crumble. The encounter with the riders had proven more than his skill, it had proven his character. And for the first time, she considered the possibility that trust, slow and careful as it must be, could exist. As they walked back toward their shared clearing, side by side yet not touching, she knew one truth with absolute clarity. Desire alone could never have built this connection. Only respect, patience and courage could. And in that truth lay a promise of something far deeper than either had yet dared to name. The night came quietly, draping the forest in a blanket of stars and silver moonlight. The fire between them crackled softly, sending sparks into the cool evening air. She sat a few paces away, hugging her knees, eyes fixed on the flames, trying to steady her racing heart. He watched her, silent, giving her the space she seemed to need, while still remaining close enough that she felt his presence like a protective shadow. "Do you ever sleep well?" she asked suddenly, her voice hesitant. She had never asked such. A personal question of anyone, not in years. The question hung between them, fragile, a thread of vulnerability stretched across the firelight. He considered it for a moment, then nodded slightly. "I do," he said, "but not always. Sometimes memories come, things I cannot forget. The trick is to keep moving forward, and to trust when someone is beside you." She studied him, surprised at the calmness in his tone. Most people who spoke of memory and pain carried bitterness in their voices. He carried none, only acceptance. And perhaps that was why she felt herself drawn to him more strongly than she wanted to admit. She started, hesitating. "I've always had to protect myself. I've never allowed anyone close enough to see who I really am." Her words were almost a whisper, yet in the quiet of the forest, they seemed to echo. He shifted slightly, closing, a fraction of the distance without invading her space. "I do not wish to change you," he said softly, "only to understand, to know that you are safe, and that the person you are, the real you, is honored, not diminished." Her chest tightened, a mix of relief and fear. She had been conditioned to expect that intimacy would bring pain, that opening up would make her vulnerable to betrayal. Yet here, across the fire, she saw no judgment, no desire to manipulate, only steady presence, patience, and a rare kind of respect. "I'm scared," she admitted finally, voice trembling. Scared that if I let anyone in, they'll only take what they want and leave the rest behind. He reached out slowly, just enough that she could feel the warmth of his hand near hers, but not touch her without consent. Then I will wait, he said simply. I will wait as long as it takes for you to trust. I want all of you, not because I demand it, but because I recognize it as yours to give freely. That is the only way I would ever want it. Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not look away. For the first time in years, someone had spoken truth without pressure, had acknowledged her fears while offering her hope. She felt the smallest flicker of courage ignite within her, a willingness to believe that someone could want her entirely, yet never try to take what she was not ready to give. The fire crackled again, tiny sparks rising into the night sky. They sat in silence, side by side, each lost in their own thoughts, yet connected by the invisible thread of trust. No words were needed. In that quiet, the forest itself seemed to hold its breath in acknowledgement of what was unfolding between them. She realized something profound. Desire without respect was hollow, but respect paired with patience could kindle something far deeper. Something enduring, something real. And as the night stretched on, she allowed herself a small, careful hope. Perhaps she could trust him. Perhaps she could let him see her. Perhaps slowly the walls she had built around her heart could begin to crumble. Not all at once, but enough for him to walk beside her as equal, as protector, and as someone who wanted more than her body. The forest whispered around them, leaves rustling like a gentle lullaby. And for the first time in a long time, she felt the beginnings of something she had almost forgotten. The quiet, steady warmth of connection, of understanding, and the fragile, precious possibility of love. The morning sun barely pierced the dense canopy when she noticed tracks near their clearing, human footprints, not entirely hidden, but purposeful. Her heart sank. She had hoped the forest could remain a sanctuary, a place where the outside world could not intrude. Yet reality had a way of finding even the most hidden corners. He appeared silently at her side, as always, and followed her gaze to the tracks. "They are not far behind," he said, voice calm but edged with warning. "We must move carefully." Her stomach knotted with a mixture of fear and frustration. She wanted to remain hidden, yet the thought of fleeing without guidance filled her with dread. And then, almost reflexively, she glanced at him, seeking assurance. In that look, she found the same patience and steadfastness she had come to rely on. "Do they come for you?" she asked, anxiety threading her words. "No," he said. "They come for what they believe belongs to them, but we will not allow them to claim it." His eyes held hers, steady, unwavering, and she realized that the statement was not just about protection. It was about partnership, about facing danger together rather than alone. They moved cautiously through the forest, each step deliberate, every sound measured. She noticed how attuned he was to everything: the subtle snap of a twig, the shifting shadow of a hawk overhead, the rustle of leaves that might conceal movement. He was not merely a warrior. He was a guardian, fully aware of the threats surrounding them and determined to keep her safe without overstepping. Hours passed, and the tracks led them to a small clearing where 3 men waited, armed and watchful. Her pulse raced, but he remained composed. "Do not move suddenly," he instructed, his voice low but commanding. "Trust what I do, and follow my lead." He stepped forward alone, hands raised in a gesture of peace, yet ready for confrontation. She felt her chest tighten, fear battling with admiration. This was not recklessness, it was deliberate, calculated courage. And yet, the sight of him standing there, calm and unyielding, sparked something within her, a sense of awe and trust, so deep that it startled her. The confrontation was tense but brief. His authority, his quiet insistence on respect, and the careful way he navigated the situation ensured that no blood was shed. When the men finally withdrew, muttering threats that fell on ears unwilling to listen, she exhaled, relief mingling with a growing admiration. "You faced them alone," she said, awe coloring her tone. "I faced them with you in mind," he replied, eyes softening as they met hers. "Your safety is my concern always. That is not the same as wanting to control you. It is wanting to stand beside you, even when danger approaches." Her defenses, though not entirely gone, softened further. She realized that his desire for her had never been about possession or fear. It had always been about respect, protection, and the quiet recognition of her strength. As they walked back toward their clearing, she noticed how the forest seemed calmer, as though even nature acknowledged the bond forming between them. The earlier tension lingered, but it was tempered by the knowledge that they had faced danger together, unyielding and united. For the first time, she understood a truth she had resisted for so long. Love and trust were not about surrendering control or giving in to desire. They were about recognition, patience, and standing together in the face of the world's threats. And with him beside her, she felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in years. A cautious, fragile hope that she could finally let someone. In the forest whispered around them, leaves rustling like a lullaby, and she knew that the challenges ahead would test them further. But she also knew that whatever came, they would face it side by side, bound not by fear or expectation, but by the quiet, unwavering respect that had grown between them from the very first moment he had said, "I want you because you don't beg." The evening sky was painted in shades of amber and rose when she finally allowed herself to speak of the past she had kept locked away. They sat by the fire, its warmth gentle against the cool night air. And for once, neither of them spoke of danger or survival. Instead, the quiet space between them invited something more fragile, more intimate. "I've never let anyone see me like this," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Her fingers traced absent patterns in the dirt, betraying a nervous energy she could not hide. "Not my fears, not my failures. Nothing. And I've spent years convincing myself that it's safer that way." He watched her, attentive but patient, understanding that forcing her words would only break the fragile thread of trust forming between them. "It is not weakness to be seen," he said gently. "It is strength. And it is only when you are known fully that you can be understood." She swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. Memories surged unbidden. Betrayal, loss, the constant need to defend herself. It was exhausting, isolating, and yet she had learned to survive in that armor. And now, sitting across from him, she realized how heavy that armor had become, how it had kept her from something she secretly longed for: connection, understanding, even love. I was used once," she admitted, the words tasting bitter but necessary. "I let someone in, and they took everything they wanted without ever considering what I needed. I swore I'd never allow that again." He nodded, the firelight catching the hard lines of his face softened by empathy. "I cannot erase the past," he said quietly. "But I can promise you this. I do not seek what is yours to give unwillingly. My desire is not to take, but to honor, to meet you as you are, not as the world expects you to be." The sincerity in his voice, the unwavering steadiness in his gaze, made her chest ache in a way that was both frightening and exhilarating. For the first time, she felt that someone could see her pain without judgment, could recognize her boundaries without frustration, and could still want her, not in spite of, but because of who she truly was. A small, tentative smile tugged at her lips, almost involuntarily. "You make it sound simple," she said, a hint of disbelief in her tone. "But it's not. It's never simple." He allowed a brief pause, then leaned closer, careful not to invade her space. "No," he admitted, "it is not simple. but the path worth taking rarely is. What we build together will require patience, trust, and courage. And I believe you have all three, more than you realize. Her heart, long guarded and wary, began to stir. She realized that what frightened her most was not the danger outside the forest, but the vulnerability she felt now, an emotional exposure she had avoided for years. And yet, for the first time, she sensed that vulnerability could be met with care, not exploitation. "I want to try," she whispered, almost to herself. "I want to believe that trust can exist, that it's possible to let someone in." He reached out, lightly brushing her hand with his, a gesture both gentle and grounding. "Then we will take it one step at a time," he said. "No rush, no demand, only patience, respect, and presence." The forest night wrapped around them, quiet and expectant. For the first time, she did not feel the need to retreat into shadows or walls. The fear was still there, but it was tempered by the warmth of understanding, the steady reassurance of someone who wanted her for more than what could be taken. And in that firelit moment, a fragile promise formed between them, not of perfection, but of patience, of gradual trust, and of a connection that had begun with words simple yet profound. "I want you because you don't beg." The following days passed in a rhythm neither of them had expected. Dawn brought light and movement, tasks and quiet observation. Nightfall brought the fire and conversations that lingered long after the flames had dimmed. They spoke less of survival now, and more of the spaces within themselves that had long been untouched. She found herself sharing stories she had never told anyone. Small anecdotes at first, then deeper memories that had shaped her cautious heart. He listened without interruption, without judgment, absorbing each word as if it were sacred. She realized that this was a type of intimacy she had never known, one that required no compromise of her autonomy, no surrender of her strength. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, painting the sky in amber and violet, they sat together by the creek. Water flowed quietly over smooth stones, reflecting the fading light. She dipped her fingers into the cool stream, feeling the current slip past her, and he watched her, quietly, respectfully, giving her the space to exist fully without intrusion. "You're different from anyone I've known," she said, her voice soft, almost vulnerable. "Most people, they either want to control or to impress. You just see me." He smiled faintly, eyes never leaving hers. "Because seeing the whole of a person, strengths, fears, boundaries, is more captivating than any superficial desire. I do not want to possess you. I want to understand you, and to stand beside you willingly, without diminishing what you already are." The honesty in his words struck her to the core. Her defenses, though still present, began to loosen in small ways. She felt a warmth rise in her chest, a mixture of hope and anticipation she had long denied herself. She glanced at him, hesitated, then let her hand hover near his. He noticed, of course, and leaned in just slightly, careful not to overstep, giving her the choice to close the gap. When her fingers brushed against his, it was brief, almost tentative, but electric. Neither moved too fast, neither pushed boundaries, yet in that small touch, the trust between them deepened immeasurably. I don't know if I'm ready for more," she admitted, a tremor in her voice betraying both fear and longing. "But I want to be close to you. I want to try." He nodded, a soft, approving gesture. "We will go as far as you allow," he said. "Every step will be yours to take, every boundary respected. Nothing more, nothing less." They sat in silence. For a while, the creek murmuring beside them, each lost in thought yet connected in ways words could not fully capture. The simplicity of being together, side by side, present, unpressured, was a revelation to her. She realized that desire could exist without coercion, that intimacy could be gentle and mutual, and that the strongest bonds were those built on respect, not urgency. But even in that peaceful moment, the forest reminded them that the outside world was never far away. A distant howl, the snap of a branch, the faint echo of movement beyond the trees, reminders that danger still lurked, that the sanctuary they had built was fragile. Yet, for the first time, she felt confident that they could face anything together, not as isolated individuals, but as partners bound by trust and understanding. As night fell completely, the stars sparkling overhead, she leaned slightly toward him. He did not move forward, only mirrored her gesture, letting her set the pace. In that quiet exchange, no words were needed. Desire and trust coexisted, delicate but undeniable, and she realized that the man beside her wanted her not because she yielded, but because she was herself, courageous, guarded, and beautifully unbroken. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future in which love was not frightening, but sustaining. A future in which desire could coexist with respect, and where the words that had first startled her, "I want you because you don't beg," were no longer just a declaration, but a promise. The forest had grown quieter over the past few days, almost as if holding its breath, waiting. She had begun to feel a fragile sense of peace, a belief that perhaps she could let herself exist fully beside him. But peace, she knew too well, was often fleeting. It was late afternoon when the first sign of trouble appeared. Smoke curled above the distant tree line, thin and almost elegant in the sunlight, but unmistakable. Fires rarely started here without cause. Her heart sank immediately. "The village," she whispered. "Something's wrong." He noticed her tension instantly, the sharp edge of fear returning to her voice. "We should move," he said, his tone calm, but urgent. "Quickly, but quietly. Stay close to me." As they approached the source, the acrid scent of smoke filled the air. Flames licked the edge of the clearing near a small outpost, and figures ran in panic, shouting orders that were lost in the roar of the growing fire. Without hesitation, he took the lead, assessing the situation with practiced precision. She followed, instinctively trusting his judgment, even though the sight of danger made her stomach churn. Suddenly a man emerged from the smoke, his intentions unclear but aggressive. He advanced toward her, and she froze. Panic surged, the old reflexes of fear and self-preservation returning with full force. But before she could react, he was there, swift, strong, and unwavering, placing himself between her and the threat. "You will not touch her," he said, voice low but commanding. The man faltered, recognizing the authority in his tone and the resolve in his stance. The moment stretched, tension hanging thick in the air, until finally the aggressor withdrew, retreating into the chaos. She exhaled sharply, adrenaline crashing into relief. Her hands trembled, and he stepped closer. Not too close, just enough to offer the comfort she hadn't known she needed. "Are you hurt?" he asked, eyes scanning her for even the smallest sign of injury. "No," she replied, voice shaky. "But thank you." The words felt insufficient for the rush of emotions inside her, fear, gratitude, and something she could not name but recognized immediately as attachment. He met her gaze steadily, his presence solid and grounding. "You do not need to thank me," he said. "I do not act out of obligation. I act because you matter, because I want to stand beside you in every danger and every calm." Her defenses, built over years of mistrust, began to crumble completely in that moment. The fire's heat, the chaos around them, and the raw sincerity in his eyes forced her to confront what she had been avoiding. Her feelings for him were no longer just cautious curiosity or tentative admiration. She wanted him. She wanted to trust him completely. She began, voice trembling with vulnerability. I don't want to lose you. Not now. Not ever. He reached out gently, cupping her face with care, and she leaned into the touch, without hesitation. You will not lose me, he promised, his voice soft yet unyielding. I am here. I am yours, as you allow me to be. Not by taking, but by standing with you. The forest around them seemed to exhale, as if acknowledging the quiet confession. Smoke curled farther into the sky, the danger beginning to fade, but the intensity between them had only grown. The fire, the chaos, the fear, they had all stripped, away the wall she had fought so hard to maintain. For the first time she understood fully, his desire had never been about possession, or control, or even urgency. It had always been about patience, respect, and recognition. And in that truth, in the quiet firelight and after the storm of danger, she finally allowed herself to surrender, not her strength, but her heart. The forest had regained its calm. The fires had been contained, the chaos fading into distant echoes. And yet for her, the world had shifted in ways far more profound than any physical threat could create. The man who had once been a mystery, a quiet observer in the shadows, had become the anchor she never knew she needed. They returned to their clearing, the familiar scent of pine and earth grounding her. She paused, inhaling deeply, letting the forest's serenity wash over her. But her attention remained fixed on him. He was watching her too, a steady presence, eyes calm yet intense, full of a devotion that no words could diminish. She began, hesitating. I've been so cautious for so long. I thought trust was a risk I couldn't take. Her voice faltered, emotion threading every word. But with you, it feels different, safe, and I don't want to hide anymore. He stepped closer, careful, giving her control over the space between them. You never need to hide from me, he said. I do not wish to change you, to break you, or to demand what you cannot give. I only wish to walk beside you, to honor the strength you've carried for so long, and to share the journey if you allow it. Her heart ached in a way she had long denied, longing, relief, fear, and desire mingling into one undeniable truth. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out, letting her hand rest against his. The warmth of his skin, the subtle tension in his muscles, spoke louder than any words could. She realized then that she was no longer afraid, not of danger, not of desire, not of allowing herself to be seen fully. He responded gently, leaning in just enough that their foreheads touched, a silent acknowledgement of everything unspoken between them. I want you, he whispered. Not because you yield, not because you are easy, but because you are entirely yourself. That is all I have ever wanted. Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear, but from relief and gratitude. For the first time, she understood that love could be patient, respectful, and profound. That desire could coexist with honor, that someone could want every part of her, her strength, her courage, her defiance, without ever diminishing it. I want you too, she admitted, voice trembling yet steady. I trust you. I trust myself with you. The forest seemed to breathe with them. Leaves rustled softly, the creek nearby murmured, and the stars above began to pierce the darkening sky. A silent witness to their union. Slowly, deliberately, they allowed the closeness they had resisted for so long to deepen. Not in haste, not in urgency, but in recognition of the trust they had built. step by careful step. His hands held, hers gentle yet protective, and then he pulled her into a tender embrace. She felt the weight of the years she had carried. The fear, the isolation, the pain lift slightly, replaced by warmth and understanding. This was not surrender, but harmony. Not giving in, but joining together. "I have wanted this," he murmured against her hair, "since the moment I saw you, not your body, but the fire within you that no one else respects." She smiled softly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "And I see you," she whispered. "I see all of you. And I finally believe that wanting someone doesn't mean losing yourself." The night embraced them as they sat by the fire, side by side, no words necessary. Every touch, every glance, every heartbeat spoke volumes. The journey had been slow, cautious, and fraught with tension, but it had led them to this. A love built on patience, respect, and the kind of desire that honored rather than consumed. And, as the stars twinkled above, she realized the truth that had been waiting for her all along. He wanted her not because she begged, not because she yielded, but because she was herself. And she finally wanted him for the same reason.